The heroic phase is usually at the beginning of the disaster, just immediately after the disaster, and it occurs when disaster has happened and there is high energy. There's a lot of adrenaline driven effort to help those in the disaster. So we also see a lot of safety and stabilization of survivors of the disaster. And we see clear communication and information. Most times in that phase, there is psychological first aid. However, in that phase, there's a lot of denial. The impact of the disaster is being denied by the survivors. The impact on their homes and on their lives is being denied by the survivors. There's also utilization of extraordinary measures to protect their homes and their families at this point. And we see that there's a lot of spiritual and community support, practical assistance, and resource coordination at this phase of the disaster. At this phase of the crisis, we also see that from the video that there was greater sensitivity to Christianity because most of the helpers came from the church and they were Christians. So the survivors were more open to Christianity. But in the heroic phase, there is impaired judgment and there is a lot of denial. And most of the survivors have suppressed their emotions. So they are actually not completely feeling the emotional reactions that they should have because they've been suppressed. They are in survival mode. We see that the denial is not a bad thing in itself because it's a survival mechanism and it's a coping strategy for survivors of disaster. Challenges from this phase could range from impaired judgment, emotional repression, emotional suppression, risk-taking behaviors, and exhaustion and burnout, especially amongst first responders. Also, we see delayed emotional reactions, so which may happen later because survivors of the disasters and even those in the heroic phase who are helping do not yet understand that this is long term and that it will take a long time for their lives to be rebuilt and for them to go back to a sense of normalcy after the disaster. The honeymoon phase follows immediately immediately after aftermath, and it's a phase characterized by gratitude, optimism, and community cohesion. And there's strong external support from the government agencies, non-profit, and volunteers. In this phase, people crash emotionally and physically, especially physically, because of the amount of energy that has been expended into the heroic phase. People who may experience this crash points will most likely include survivors who have lost their homes, their livelihood, families of victims of the disaster, and their loved ones and their friends. Also, vulnerable people like individuals with low income or individuals with pre-existing mental health conditions. Also, first responders, those who have actively helped and responded to the crisis, may have a delayed stress reaction. You also have individuals whose social system, whose social network and their support system have weakened over time. This crash point usually occurs when external aid decreases, as media attention also fades, external help decreases, more and more people who are helping are exhausted, and now the realization that rebuilding and going back to the disaster situation will take a long time. So that reality of the long-term rebuilding would result in also a crash. Also, delays in insurance and financial compensations can also lead to a crash. This crash point is actually the point where survivors and everyone realizes that there's no quick fix to the issue, and the feeling of hopelessness, abandonment, like I said before, because outside help is shrinking, and they become fearful of their future, fearful of what life would be, and how they would carry on after this disaster. They also feel helpless and sometimes angry too. Angry because of the experience that they've had, and a sense of futility. So the task ahead is so great, and it looks like it is what cannot be accomplished. Why does this actually occur? Why does this crash point occur? Um, it occurs because emotional processing then begins after the pressure, the survival pressure has decreased. So that's when people are able to process their emotions, process the impact of the disaster. Also, there are some unrealistic expectations about recovery that will be unmet, which can also result in the crash point. And fatigue too, because of the amount of adrenaline that goes into the heroic phase. Fatigue and tiredness sets in, which replaces the adrenaline. There are also ongoing stressors such as housing, unemployment, legal issues that can accumulate and add to the pressure that is felt that could lead to the crash point. The disillusionment phase is actually the phase where people experience fear, anger, and hopelessness, and is characterized by frustration, resentment, perceived abandonment, despair. And at this phase, recovery seems slow, and support has declined, and individuals may feel that they are forgotten or abandoned, and which can result in other issues. So issues like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and also substance use disorders, suicide ideation. So for these, the best treatment approach will be trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, group counseling. The TFCBT would help reconstruct maladaptive thoughts, would also help reduce avoidance, and also teach coping skills and coping skills that the client can use. Group counseling also is a good way, it's a good treatment method which would help reduce isolation, help normalize the experience. So when people come into groups and find that they are not isolated, that other people have the same shared experience that they've had, it goes a long way in helping them. Also, it also strengthens social support. So because of the disaster, most times the support that people have socially is disrupted, and group counseling helps to strengthen the social support and provide that sense of community that is needed in the aftermath of a disaster and in the disillusionment phase.